Ladies and gentlemen, you're being brilliant at both eating and listening. I thank you for that. And let me immediately invite up to this stage our panelists on a session on the United States, past, present, but more particularly future. So let's get onto our stage, three very familiar faces to all of you. Let me invite Condoleezza Rice, Larry Summers, and Michael McFaul. If all three of you would come up to the stage now, I'd be very grateful. Please give them all a very, very warm welcome. Hello, all three of you. No seating plan, so just take the seat which looks most attractive.
Looks like the Democrats are on the right.
Well, we're not going to play party politics, at least not to begin with. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to give each of them the glowing CV history that they deserve because you all know them very well. Suffice to say, we've got a former Treasury Secretary, we've got a former Secretary of State and Presidential National Security Advisor, and we've got a former US Ambassador to Moscow who has become something, I think it's fair to say, of a personal favorite of Vladimir Putin over recent months and years. So we've got a terrific panel, and we're going to talk about the United States, and I hope also reflect on what the relevance of what's happening in the US is to Ukraine and to wider European issues as well. But we're going to want to start, I think, by talking about US domestic politics. And I want to ask all three of you to reflect on this very basic question. We've heard a lot of serious intelligence, foreign affairs, and diplomatic analysts, men of vast experience in the United States, men and women, I should say, of vast experience, talking about their fears about what the Trump presidency is doing to the United States, both in terms of domestic politics and polarization and in terms of the US and its place in the world. So Condoleezza, let me start with you. Do you share those very deep concerns that we hear expressed pretty much every day of the week in Washington?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us here, and thank you, Victor, for greeting us again here in Ukraine. Let me just start by saying that the United States does have its difficulties. We are a polarized country at this point. We are a country in which many of our fellow citizens feel that they have been left behind by rapid globalization, and in fact are being left behind further by rapid automation. We still have an educational system that at the K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, doesn't serve our poorest children well. And so, yes, we have our problems. But I think it's important to get the diagnosis right. President Trump did not cause these problems. We can have a debate about whether his particular style exacerbates those problems, but unless you recognize that these are long-term growing trends in the United States, you're going to miss the diagnosis, and therefore you will miss the prescription for getting better. And so, yes, I'm concerned about the United States. But let me just say one other thing about President Trump, and then I want to say something very optimistic about the United States. President Trump is one of many actors in our political system. The founding fathers of the United States, and for a young democracy like Ukraine, this is a very important lesson. The founding fathers were very suspicious of executive power, and they made certain that it would be severely checked by creating a Congress with two houses. We now have 535 people in those houses of Congress who believe that they should be president. We have 50 governors. We have state legislatures. We have a strong civil society. We have a press. And so this is a system, not a single person. And just one final thing. I am fortunate. I live in California. I get to teach the next generation. And America's going to be all right. I wouldn't overstate our problems, but they're problems that we have to address.
Well, it's an optimistic take, and it actually echoes what historian Neil Ferguson was saying earlier about the US system and the fact that for all of our preoccupation with Donald Trump, he ain't no king, he ain't no monarch. But if Condoleezza's right and that we should relax because the US system with its checks and balances is still pretty much healthy, in your view, and I'll start with you, Larry, then Michael, in your view, does the system, the checks and balances, mean that Donald Trump is in very grave danger of not even finishing his first term? I.e., do you see the system offering the realistic prospect that this president may be impeached?
I think the strength of the president's political position is overstated by the conventional wisdom. I learned as a child that when the weather forecaster said there was going to be 2 inches of snow, then the weather forecaster said there were going to be 6 inches, there was probably going to be a foot. And that's the way I read prognostications about the midterm election, which I think is going to be, which I expect will be substantially more adverse for the president than the current conventional wisdom has it. I believe he is without a reservoir of personal loyalty anywhere in American politics. And when a whiff of kryptonite, and I believe the election will be more than a whiff of kryptonite, is in the air, Superman starts to seem much less strong. And so I have no idea what the Mueller report will reveal. I have no idea. I have some idea, but I can't predict when the economy will turn down. I can't predict which of the president's depredations will strike a particularly strong chord. But I do think the odds that he will not make it to the end, which are generally discounted by the conventional wisdom, may not be 50-50, but they're considerably greater than the conventional wisdom has it. I agree with Condi's broad and basic sense of the resilience of American society in moving beyond moments of grave concern. But I don't think that happens automatically. I think that happens because people become intensely concerned, as they did when Joe McCarthy was riding high, as they did when Jimmy Carter gave his malaise speech, and there was a sense that the country was ungovernable. And so I don't discount this tremendous sense of anxiety about President Trump and what President Trump will do. I think the history of the United States is a history that demonstrates the power of self-denying prophecy. And I suspect that will happen again. The worst scenarios will not play out, but that will not be because there's anything benign about this presidency, but because the alarm it is engendering will call forth a substantial response.
Okay, well, thank you, Larry. My opener to you, Michael, is to particularly focus on foreign affairs and the impact of Trump on U.S. foreign policy and global strategy. I alluded at the beginning to officials in Washington, former officials, who've said some pretty remarkable things about this president. I saw John Kerry on TV the other day say flat out, this is the worst president in the United States and the most dangerous president in the history of the United States. And I remember John Brennan, former CIA chief, talking about the treacherous behaviors of Donald Trump. Particularly, I think he was talking about the way he saw Trump handle that summit with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I didn't like the way he handled that either, because I was part of that. Handing over people to be interrogated, that was not a good move on his part.
Yeah, that's true. You sort of had a bit part in all of that. So what I'm getting to is this. Do you share this sort of fairly apocalyptic view of the impact Trump is having on pillars of U.S. foreign policy? Or you could take the alternative view and say, you know what, he's actually telling some truths to the world, which other presidents have avoided doing, and he's actually done some pretty remarkable things, like, you know, change the dynamic in the Korean Peninsula in a way that might be exciting. So where do you sit?
So generally, I think the Trump administration has a pretty sound set of foreign policies. And I put the emphasis on administration. And we could go through all of them if you want. I don't think you want to. But when you look at actually what's happened, I think it's pretty good. With respect to Russia, for instance, I think the Trump administration has a good policy. It's a lot of continuity with the Obama administration. And on some things, lethal assistance to Ukraine, it's gone in I would say, a more positive direction. The problem is the president doesn't agree on a lot of issues with his own administration when it comes to foreign policy. That's clear with respect to Russia. That's clear with respect to NATO. That's clear with respect to even, I would say, North Korea. And usually we out, watching, let me just speak for me. Usually we say, well, that's okay, he tweets, he says what he wants, but the real policy chugs along. Every now and then, the president, as our system is designed, has an impact on the policy, right? And so that, I think, is the paradox of our time. I think it could not go on for 6 more years. That would not happen. That's why I'm optimistic, too. I just want to be part of the optimistic crowd about American democratic institutions. I think they are showing themselves to be fantastically robust in a way to check executive power. And that's why, if Larry's right about the midterms, that will have implications for foreign policy, and that disconnect, I think, will be more connected.
Go on.
I think it's worse than you say, Mike. Maybe in some sense the administration has a good foreign policy, but we've taken the approval of the United States around the world from a high level to a low level.
Right, but that has everything to do with Trump, not the policy.
Well,
that's
okay.
the point. That's the point.
But the point is that you can't have a policy divorced from your president. Pragmatically, we are out of the climate. We are out of the climate agreement. Our NATO allies worry about how long there is going to be a NATO. We're in a trade war over a national security tariff that we imposed on Canada. And I don't see how you can look at that and say that there's anything good about the way our foreign policy is playing out.
Fascinating exchange, and I want to take it over to Condi, because it seems to me, it's kind of wonderful, Condi, that we have you sitting with us.
Yeah.
You're a fairly recent serving Secretary of State and also White House National Security Advisor. And what these two have just been discussing, in a way, gets to something really important about the dynamic inside the Trump presidency. And it was brought out again by the Bob Woodward book and by the anonymous letter testimony in the New York Times recently, and that is this. What is actually happening in terms of policymaking in Washington today? Is the president being countermanded by his most senior staff, and is there, quote unquote, some sort of deep state that is keeping a steady hand on the tiller despite the unpredictability of the guy in the Oval Office?
Oh, okay, let's step back for a second, all right? Like it or not, Donald Trump is president of the United States. He got elected. That's our democratic system. And perhaps, Larry, something will happen and he won't be president of the United States through constitutional means. But until that happens, he is president of the United States. My own view is that Mike is right about the way that the administration is conducting what I'll call war and peace issues, because, Larry, I would agree. I think some of the trade policy has been really very, very harmful. Although I will say it was sort of clever to make a deal with the Mexicans, and now the Canadians kind of have to play. So, there's been some cleverness in this trade policy.
Whether he knew what he was doing is another matter.
That's another matter, but there was some cleverness there. But let me go back to the question of what may or may not be happening inside the administration. On those polls about how popular the United States is or is not, I was in an administration that apparently the United States wasn't all that popular either. But we were advocating for democracy. We were advocating for Ukraine to be a part of NATO. We were advocating for a strong policy against Russia, et cetera, et cetera. So I would not get too caught up in what the polls say about the, quote, popularity of the United States. Because sometimes people don't like an assertive America. So let's just be careful about those polls. I don't know what's going on inside the White House. None of us do.
No, fair point.
I have been the subject myself of many a Bob Woodward treatise. And so I know that there can be, I think Bob's a terrific reporter. He's also somebody who can make a story. And so
Yeah, but he doesn't by and large make things up.
He does not make things up. But whether or not there's a tendency in any of these books to take 2 and 2 and get 136 from it, I think is something that we have to be a little bit careful of. So let me just finish. I don't know what's going on inside the White House. I suspect that particularly on trade policy, there are 2 very strong wings in the White House, and that they are vying to try and keep trade policy on course with a more traditional trade policy. I think it's pretty evident that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, maybe Larry Kudlow, maybe the Commerce Secretary, are trying to carry out policies that scratch the president's itch about trade, because the president actually believes, one thing he's really convicted about, is that the United States was disadvantaged by trade agreements over the last 40 years. And I do think you see some within the White House trying to prevent the collapse of NAFTA, prevent an all-out trade war with China. And that is a bit unusual.
Here's a couple of just very simple questions. Knowing what you know and seeing what you see in Washington today, would you serve this president?
I've done my part. I'm not going to serve
No, but that's not
any
the question.
president.
I'm just saying, if you were, let's say you were a Jim Mattis.
I do not answer hypotheticals, to begin with. And secondly, I was Secretary of State for a president that I admired in a time of consequence for the country. I'm done anyway. So it's a null question.
I see I'm not going to make progress with that line of questioning, but let me put it a different way. What Trump appears to be intent on doing, if he doesn't get his own way, is setting up a battle between him and his sort of voice of the people politics and the quote-unquote deep state, the elite, the system, the establishment in Washington, which is thwarting the will of the people. And it strikes me that is a potentially dangerous form of politics to play, and I just wonder whether you fear for what it might do to the American system.
This is a version of American populism, and I'm not one who is particularly drawn to that. But let's go back to where we started. There is a reason that that message resonates with so many Americans, that somehow there's an elite that doesn't respect their culture, doesn't respect their values, doesn't understand that if you're a coal miner in West Virginia, globalization doesn't look so good. There's a reason, and it's, by the way, not just in the United States. It's Brexit in Great Britain. It's the 5-star movement in Italy. It's what's just happened in Sweden. These people, these populists, are appealing to something that's real. And no, it's not my cup of tea. And no, I don't like this, quote, assault on the establishment and on the so-called deep state. But again, if we don't get the diagnosis right, we're not going to solve the problem.
Larry, you are the deep state. I mean, not on your own, but I can't imagine many guys in Washington more fit Donald Trump's sort of notion of what the deep state is.
Well, let me say a couple things. First, I would surely not remain in the administration of any president who I thought had the temperament of a child or the intellect of a 5th grader, or who I thought lacked integrity in his basic and regular dealings. And it is very disappointing to me that, starting from anonymous, there have not been more principled resignations from this administration. I think it's an unfortunate thing, and I suspect my colleagues on this panel also would not remain in an administration with a president for whom they had contempt. Every memoir of a senior official always talks about the centrality of their relationship with their president for their ability to be effective. And so this concept of a foreign policy of an administration separate from the foreign policy of a president is not one that I can buy into. Look, I think elites have, in important respects, failed. They have gotten us into wars, going back to Vietnam, that ultimately seemed ill-advised. They did not prevent the financial crisis. The response to the financial crisis seemed, and you can argue the merits of this, to be more oriented to protecting elite interests. So I think that Condi is completely right in talking about this rise of populism as a central challenge of our time. And I think if people don't respond to that, there are likely to be very serious problems. Look, one way of thinking about this is think about a very different field, medicine. There are no quack cures for strep throats or broken arms. That's because doctors know how to cure them and succeed in curing them. There are a large number of quack cures for cancer and for the common cold because medicine doesn't know how to solve them. And the fact that the political elite has not found effective solutions for the kind of middle-class estrangement that Condi eloquently described is why you have Brexit, is why you have Donald Trump, is why you have people on horseback. And it's a very profound challenge that we ignore at our very great peril.
All right, just a final quick one from me, and then I'm going to open it up to, I hope, wiser questions than I can come up with from our audience. But just, I want to make it relevant to where we sit in Kiev, to questions about geopolitics which concern East Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. Donald Trump's outlook, and Michael, I take you on board everything you say about Donald Trump not being the administration and the policy being a complex sort of weaving of the two. But Donald Trump's mindset may be indicative of something deeper in America. That is, he sees geopolitics in terms of America's national interest, whether it be protectionism in terms of trade policy or whether it be projecting US's singular national interest overseas. He's not interested in multilateral institutions. He doesn't appear to believe in phrases like the rules-based international order, and that matters if you're looking at life from Kiev. So taking on board what you said before about the difference between Trump and the administration, is there something deep within America which is moving away from the last 50 years of sort of multilateralism and, in a sense, selfless international politics?
So two comments first. First of all, I want to identify with what Condi said in the beginning. Trump is the symptom of these trends we're talking about. I also want to underscore that I don't think he's done a damn thing about it. So let's be clear about that. He's done a very traditional, if I were a traditional Republican, I'd be very happy with what he's done. I'm not, I'm a Democrat. I'd be very happy with him. But those coal miners and all those people that allegedly he's speaking to, I don't think he's done anything for them. And neither, when we talk about a national debate about doing that, we're not having that debate right now. Let's just be clear about that. Number two, do not overemphasize the significance of one election in America, okay? Let's be very careful about generalizing what's going to happen for the next 50 years based on a vote that he won with 78,000 votes in 3 states that Barack Obama won twice. So if you say this is a brand new thing, explain to me how Barack Obama won those 2 places too. And oh, by the way, he also actually lost by 3 million votes.
So no change in the broader mood in America toward these questions of...
No, I'm saying don't assume you know that this is some inflection point. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying I know it is, but we make this assumption because of Brexit and Trump, we're in some brand new world. I'm not sure of that. And number 3, that gets me to foreign policy. I'm always been for America's national interests. Who is not? If you're an American, it's just in how you pursue them. I believe it is in America's national interest to be in NAFTA, to do TPP, to be in the UN Security Council. He's got a different definition, but don't make a mistake. It's wrong to cede the territory to say somehow we're not patriotic nationalists. I think his theory about that is flawed, and I'm not sure the people that he claims to represent understand whether or not he's actually serving their interests, and that's on the Democrats to explain, to get to them.
All right.
We need some Democratic populists to talk about these things in a way that say, no, actually, blowing up NAFTA or blowing up NATO is not, Mr. Coal Miner in West Virginia, in your national interest. That's on us.
All right. I want you two to answer my question if you can remember it, and then I'm going to turn it over to audience questions. But you look like you wanted to respond.
Look, I think there's always been a debate in American foreign policy as to whether the way to, everybody's for pursuing American interests, but there are two broad ways of visions of how best to pursue American interests. One is for America to underwrite an open, generous, global system, because that system will ultimately make it less necessary for the United States to make interventions like the one it did in World War I and II, and will ultimately support our prosperity. And that underwriting and supporting a liberal system in the economic and political elements is the best way to serve American interests. An alternative view, and candidate Jimmy Carter talked about taking our troops out of South Korea. An alternative view is that in an increasingly economically competitive world, where the U.S. middle class is increasingly burdened, where our infrastructure is decaying and our schools still don't work, we can no longer afford that, and that we need to be another country, albeit a big and powerful one, using our leverage and using our tools to bargain for the best deals we can in a ceaseless competitive struggle between nations. And that tension has always existed in American foreign policy, and I believe that, I'm not terribly enthusiastic about it, but I believe that we are moving towards the second view from the first view, and that there are fluctuations up and down, but that is the way things are moving. This first came home to me when my good friend Richard Haas wrote a book 8 years ago as the president of the Council on Foreign Relations that was entitled Foreign Policy Begins at Home, and talked about the importance of spending money on infrastructure and schools and whatnot. So I think the rest of the world does need to adjust itself to an evolving American view, of which the Trump rhetoric is an extreme swing, but something very real is happening.
Agreed, Condi?
Well, let me just say very briefly, if you read the Jeffrey Goldberg interview with Barack Obama, that last interview, it's refined Donald Trump. Sorry. And so there's some refined Donald Trump in there, right? The criticism of the lies, the United States needs to step back. This has been going on for a while. There is something that comes with 70 years of doing this that Americans start to say, didn't we defeat the Soviet Union? Didn't we unify Germany? We mostly defeated Al-Qaeda. Can't somebody else do this? And so, yes, there is a little bit of impulse there. There's also a kind of lack of confidence. Our infrastructure is not very good. You go to airports around the world, they're better than American airports. Trump said that, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's actually true. So, yes, there is some of that. But let me just say one thing about the American people. There are two impulses in the American people. One is we're tired, we'd like somebody else to do it. But when something happens that demonstrates that if we don't do it, nobody will, Americans get mobilized. They didn't want to see people beheaded on television by ISIS, and they wanted us to act. They don't like seeing Syrian babies choking on chemical weapons, and they wanted us to act. They don't like to see Vladimir Putin annexing the territory of his neighbors. And so I think there are twin impulses in America, in Americans. And presidents can play to either impulse. And for a while now, there's been a sense of play to the sense of weariness rather than to the sense of promise. And so what I really would like to see from whomever is president is more playing to the sense of promise and possibility. That's what Ronald Reagan was so good at doing. Ronald Reagan didn't love multinational institutions, but he was very good at saying, Americans, you have a larger calling in the world. And that's what we've been missing, and we've been missing it for a while.
Great. Well put. And I'm now going to open it up to questions from the floor. I can see hands going up already. You, sir, you've caught my eye, yeah, and you've stood up, so let's see if we can get you a microphone. Give us your name and a pithy, concise question if you can, although I'm struggling at the moment to see a microphone. Have we got a microphone? You could yell.
That's Charlie Kupchan. He's a professor at Georgetown. He's writing a book about isolationism. Go ahead, Professor.
There you go.
Got one. I wanted to ask the panel to address what I heard as a contradiction between the optimism that you all expressed on the resilience of the United States and the issue that Larry raised and that Ray Kurzweil discussed right before lunch of our inability to figure out how to make sure that average Americans earn a living wage. Because if Kurzweil is right, and artificial intelligence and the digital economy move ahead really quickly, then this problem of low wages and unemployment is going to get worse, not better. And I agree with Michael, Trump has not done anything to tackle this problem. So speak a little bit about the underlying conditions and how they connect to the optimism that all of you are expressing.
Yeah, do that, speak to it, but keep it nice and short because we're running out of time.
Look, the risk is a toxic dynamic in which a changing set of conditions mean that governments have to do more, and a changing and deteriorating set of conditions mean that there's less confidence in government's ability to do it. And so things fall further and further behind. I think there is a bipartisan program. You know, you take education, and Democrats are right that we need more resources, and Republicans are right that we need more accountability and choice. You take infrastructure. Democrats are right that we need more public investment. Republicans are right that there needs to be a larger role for the private sector and that the regulatory process needs to be streamlined. You take energy. Democrats are right that we need to be investing more heavily in renewables. Republicans are right that we need to be able to take advantage of our fossil fuel resources and that we need to be able to build pipelines rather than ship oil on trucks and trains. So I think there is a program that can improve the situation over time of the middle class. I think the lesson of previous technological transformations is a subtle one. It is that ultimately they mean more prosperous and more comfortable lives for the vast majority of the population, but that does not happen automatically through some miracle of the market, but it happens as a consequence of broad reorderings of the society in which the government has a central role. And that's what we need, and it needs to have elements of thought from the left of center and elements of thought from the right of center.
All right, I'm going to ask for brevity now from questioners and panel because we're really short of time. Yeah, well, I'd like, yep, you with the blue dress, that would be great. Give us your question.
Thank you very much. I know it's much easier to bring good news than bad news, but I would like to ask you how much you take into account in what a vast speed Europe with many countries is drifting away from the United States as it is at the moment, and that we really have to fight that we are at the danger of cutting the transatlantic alliance, which Kremlin, of course, is doing a lot for to work inside our societies, and which is so important for the future of Ukraine.
Indeed, and it's an important point, and I'm glad you've raised it, and I want Condoleezza to address it.
Thank you. I'm a committed transatlanticist. I agree completely that the institutions, whether economic or security, that came out of World War II, defeated the Soviet Union, have given a chance. Absolutely, I'm a transatlanticist.
And do you see that drift?
But let me just say this. I worry more that Europe is drifting away from itself. I worry more about the internal cohesion of Europe than I worry about the European-American relationship. I really do think that Europe has to address its own problems. I have said to my European colleagues, one thing that you can do when you're addressing the United States is realize that there is this sense that we've done this for a long time and Europe needs to do more. But my concern is that it's hard for Europe to do more when you're in the middle of Brexit, when you have the Hungary-Poland problem from within, and so on and so on. So I completely associate myself with your comment, but I just wanted to say I think it's also a complexity of Europe itself.
Well, those are themes that are going to recur through the course of the day and a half we have left and the conference. So let's leave that question. We're going to have to end in just a moment. I'm mindful that we got some big thoughts earlier from Neil Ferguson, who actually encouraged us not to get too preoccupied with the discussion of the man he wouldn't name who sits in the White House, and also to think about the strengths that America has, both institutionally and historically. So to wrap this up, I'm going to invite Neil to give us a comment which our panel may want to respond to, and then I think we've run out of time. But Neil, I'm searching around to see if I can find you. There you are. Where's the microphone? Can we get a microphone to Neil to give us his thoughts on what he's heard? Off you go, Neil.
Well, Stephen, I thought you'd forgotten all about me, so I'm touched to be called on. It's a little awkward since on your panel are two current colleagues and one former boss, and for that reason you won't be entirely surprised that I agree with a lot of what's been said. But let me make 2 points in response to two things that Larry, my former boss, said with which I disagreed. The first was your observation that there was a higher than 50% probability that President Trump wouldn't see out his term in office. And I can't understand how you arrive at that conclusion.
I didn't say that. I said higher than the conventional wisdom, but quite likely less than 50%.
Oh, I misheard you in that case, because it seems to me to be 0%, in the sense that even if...
At those odds, at the 0%, I would be happy to make a rather substantial bet with you.
Very good. How many Bitcoin would you like to bet? The reason I ask this is that even if you're right, and I think you probably are, that the Democrats win back the House and maybe even make a fight of it for the Senate, there's no conceivable way that impeachment could be successful, because they certainly won't have a supermajority in the Senate. And impeachment seems only likely to get off the ground if there's a real erosion to Trump's popularity. That was really what sealed Nixon's fate more than anything that happened in Congress. And I think one key observation that you should all bear in mind is that when discussions of American politics take place, professors from Harvard and Stanford are generally at a disadvantage when it comes to understanding the people who support Donald Trump, and I suspect will continue to support Donald Trump very staunchly when he comes under attack from a Democratic House. Second observation, and then I'll shut up. Larry, you made the now very conventional point, unusually for you, that the United States is isolated internationally, that it's alienating its allies, and it's, I suppose, disrupting the liberal international order that served it so well. But I'm not sure that that's a truly global perspective. I think that's what you hear when you go to Western Europe, because Western European politicians love hating on Donald Trump almost as much as Harvard professors do. But when you travel more widely, it's striking how much sympathy there is for the Trump administration's policies. For example, in standing up to China, in challenging the assumption that China's rise is inexorable. Indeed, even West European business leaders will quietly tell you that whatever their politicians may say, they agree with the Trump administration's strategy on China. You go to the Middle East and you find overwhelming agreement with the Trump administration's abandonment of the Iran deal and its sustained pressure on Iran. So I think you're misrepresenting the international perception of the Trump administration by listening a little too much to European politicians and perhaps also your Harvard colleagues. With that, I'll sit down and shut up.
Given that there's very little time left, I'm intrigued to see how Larry is going to squeeze an answer to that into about 30 seconds, which is what you're going to have to do.
On Trump's prospects, he has no loyalty, no personal feeling among Republican political figures. If he is weak and his coattails are no longer a central imperative for them, we'll see whether they stick with him or whether they don't. And I'm much less confident they will than you are. On Trump, you are absolutely right that let me answer this way. Unlike many of my Harvard colleagues, you would never have heard me say anything like the things I said during this panel at any point during the George W. Bush administration, even though I had disagreements with the policy of the George W. Bush administration. And so I might be wrong, but I'm aware of the importance of the United States having a capacity to be assertive. And I am not a mushy, gooey multilateralist of the type that many I interact with are.
Well, Larry,
but I think the fact that I'm in a very different place on this administration than I was on previous Republican administrations
all right. And I'm gonna,
should tell you something.
I got you. I'm gonna. You and Neil may well want to continue that conversation outside, but I'm going to leave the last word on this panel discussion to Condoleezza.
I have just 3 quick points. First of all, the party in power always loses in the midterms. And so we have to keep that in mind. We don't know the size of it, but the party in power always loses, particularly in the House. Secondly, I think, Neil, your point about the rest of the world is well worth taking, particularly in the Middle East, where I think the policies of the Trump administration have been very popular. Final point, there are things, Larry, that Republicans do like. Tax cuts, the energy policy, deregulation, and so forth. I think the real question is, can the president somehow begin to wrap these into an image of certainty, an image of confidence, and an image of optimism, rather than such a dark view of what America is? And I think that is what I worry most about. We've begun to have a kind of dark view of who we are, of each other, and what our prospects are.
Well, Condoleezza, I thank you, and Larry and Michael, I thank you too. It's been a fascinating debate. Where America is today, who knows where it's going to be in 1 year, let alone 5 years. But one thing's for sure, it does matter to every single one of us. Matters a very great deal. So, ladies and gentlemen, finish up your lunch. The idea, we are running a little bit late, but the idea is that we're going to get back to our next panel session at round about, well, we're hoping around 3:05. So that gives you about 15 minutes to finish lunch, have a coffee and a chat. 3:05, we'll start the afternoon session. But before we go, please give an enormous thank you to our 3 panelists. Thank you all very much indeed.